Oh, okay. Thanks for the invitation to speak as well. And Susanna said, say something about China. So I'm going to say something about China. It's more a story of collaboration and exploration rather than anything to do with rare earth elements. So I don't think I have one element on here that is rare, some very common and some very toxic, and some big challenges. But I want to particularly sort of present a short story of a collaborative venture, which for me was very intense and quite a sometimes emotional journey as well, because it was a very strong cultural experience and change for me as well. But I also want to acknowledge the fact that I've been collaborating with Susanna's university for over 10 years in PhD exchange programs, and it's really nice to be standing in the corridor downstairs waiting for everyone to...
Please shout.
Okay, everyone, waiting for everyone to start, and meeting colleagues that I've known for 10 years, just walking past. So great to be back. So the story today is very much about the perspective I have of the rapid changes in China's environmental challenges and some of the resource exploitation and environmental protection issues that have arisen very rapidly. Those of you who have experience, please share your comments with me as well, or with us during the presentation. And what I want to focus on is very much a relationship between my university and the university in Hunan province, Hunan University of Science and Technology, and the collaboration that's developed on the basis of their position as hosting a key laboratory for shale gas exploitation in the region. And we'll come back to why that is significant in this respect.
Keep going.
Okay. So the
You can keep
challenge is that over a very rapid period of time, in contrast perhaps to parts of Western Europe, the explosion in industrial activity in China came with a lot of baggage in terms of impacts on the wider environment. And certainly there are stories of extensive accidents, spills, and discharges of wastes into regions where agricultural growth and consumption is extremely high. And that intense urbanization, which took perhaps a century in Europe or more to take place and disappear, took place over a very rapid period of a few decades. And so that intensity is something that we have come to find has left a residue that's significant. And I guess this is quite old by now, but I found this paper in Environmental Earth Sciences published in 2010. I think it's a very neat way of trying to reflect on that impact. And what these guys did is look at the urbanization of a particular region in China, and as it was sealed, used that as an archive. And so went back to locations that were sealed at a particular point and have collected soil samples and analyzed them for potentially toxic elements, and have some very nice relationships in terms of the increase over time in terms of impact on soil quality. And they cross-calibrated that with samples of tree rings, the idea being that the bark traps atmospheric particles and again acts as an archive. We do it properly when we have ice cores, but not a lot of ice hanging around this part of the world at the time. So we can see that rapid increase and very rapid trend in urbanization along with industrial emissions. And I guess the key to it was a survey in 2014, or publication of a survey in 2014, that showed most cities in urban China were extensively contaminated, and approximately 20% of farmland in China exceeded the environmental quality standard for safe agricultural production. An enormous burden on the economy and in terms of the wider ecosystem. And the contaminants, a mixture of the traditional famous sort of environmental pollutants that most regulatory agencies in the world have trouble managing and regulating, but a mixture of metals, metalloids, and persistent organic pollutants. So that essentially, and that was quite widely publicized, and it certainly stimulated a growth in environmental concern within the region, within the country, and set the scene for, again, which is typically associated with the strong focus on progression and progress, resulted in quite rapid environmental change as a result of regulatory interventions, and in particular highlighting for local reasons in the area that we're studying, the impact on rice production. Just a very busy slide again. Apologies, I have quite a few diagrams I've stolen, but just to emphasize the production of staple food associated with water limitations in terms of particular locations and population. So there's a slight disconnect between the supply and the demand. But the challenge here is that the impact of this extensive agriculture, this extensive industrial expansion was to contaminate, seriously contaminate the food chain. And this diagram just tries to superimpose. It's from it's a screenshot from an active site where you can play around with your favorite location, your favorite pollutant. But I've just clicked all, and you can see here the pollution input and the rice output, if you like. So where the green is superimposed by the grey, you get that funny color. And in particular, Hunan region, which is where we're interested, is severely compromised in terms of its rice production. Very active rice production, very good rice production, but very serious food chain contamination. And so 3/5 of China's sown area is contaminated by a very high proportion of the emissions to the environment of potentially toxic elements. They use the term heavy metals, which perhaps we shouldn't use. And Hunan is the most exposed part of that region. And here we have examples of some of the challenges in terms of food chain, that close proximity of personal agriculture and food production, and the generations that it affects, so from the old to the young. And so as a result of that recognition, then the challenge is essentially for remediation. So how do you remediate large portions of your country when all we have is experience of small plot by plot remediation strategies? And this is a particular challenge for the future of Chinese food production in many respects. The strategies that we would expect to envisage in perhaps former industrialized sites, looking in terms of the ability to identify sources, the identification of those responsible, which sits in a quite a strange mixture between sort of government and government-sponsored companies, which have business performance standards surrounding them. We have challenges in terms of identifying the worst sites and managing those, and then identifying a sector that is responsible for cleaning up. And so this is something that's developed over a decade or so in many respects, and a number of you will have experience of businesses that are responsible for remediation that have evolved over many decades, if not centuries, in terms of European experience in terms of environmental remediation. So we've got an incredibly high demand in terms of the sources of pollution in the environment, and a relatively young environmental professional sector in that area. So how does that challenge play out? And I guess it's a case of watching this space. So as a result of the 2014 evidence, then we saw a fairly rapid introduction of environmental protection law and prioritization of new concepts and their application in the region. And I guess the challenge is around how that cleanup process would then be implemented. Vast scale, as I've already mentioned, not the plot-to-plot issue that we typically see in the UK or in the EU in general. Apologies, I would normally say EU, but my slides are changing, unfortunately. And how we can evolve a smarter way of doing this based on the fact that we've got such large quantities of environmental degradation or extended environmental degradation to deal with. And I guess the sort of moving forward to now, where are we? We undertook a little bit of work through one of our PhD students in China, who's just defended her thesis on Friday, looking at trying to understand how the new regulatory approach has been implemented in China and its success, some of the characteristics of the businesses that have evolved. And that has been sort of heralded by a recognition in terms of the release of a new regulatory statement in June 2021 that has highlighted the development process as being a great success in terms of or an objective in terms of trying to control and remediate pollution. So just as we would see in many parts of Europe, that development processes, building new residences or developing industrial sites, is then the financial incentive or the tool to clean up. That approach has also been successful in some respects in China, but on a scale that's much greater than we would normally have from a plot-by-plot development in sort of more traditional contaminated land management. So we're talking in the scale of cities as a method to control contamination. So development, again, is the only financial incentive that allows treatment to take place. And overall, the control as a result has been quite progressive in that respect. The work that we've been involved with, I'll just skim through a couple of studies, is around the appointment of the university as Hunan University of Science and Technology as a provincial key laboratory for resource exploitation, but along with the exploitation comes environmental management and addressing the issues of mining and extraction of resources from vast quantities of the region. We'll see why in a second. And the partnership that I've been involved with has developed over since 2014, and certainly during the many submissions of the Panorama program. I was in China editing feedback to Susanna to contribute to the application. So Panorama has evolved through our evolution of work here as well. So the reason Hunan is a particularly important region is summarized here. This is just a quick screenshot from Mindat website, which if you haven't used it, please go and have a look, find your favorite part of the world and see what lives there from a potential exploitation perspective. And you can see here just from the very simple list of the major identified mineral sources or exploited sources, everything from antimony to zinc, A to Z, in that region, and certainly the location of these sources is across the region. Changsha is the main city here, the hometown of Chairman Mao, and extensive mineral exploration around the region. And you can see from this snapshot here of the complexity of the landscape as well. So it's not the sort of nice open land that's easy to access and easy to engage with. It's very, very dissected, often karst region.
But how big is it's maybe half of Europe?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
Sometimes we say, oh, we have amazing regions in China, they have everything, but actually, if you compare with all Europe, we have more or less the same.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of the sort of extent of interaction here, we've got quite difficult topography to deal with. And so some of the work that the guys have been involved with, looking at modeling discharge from surface water in mine sites over sort of many kilometer scale dimensions in watersheds, looking at the leaching of waste rock and the contribution to the wider hydrological cycle in terms of contamination, and spatially looking at the distribution of residues from that exploitation process, the typical situation being that communities live very close to the exploitation site, and so that food chain is very strongly compromised, and here just trying to rank in terms of the mining on this is a thallium within the region, and associated with that the impact on the local food chain. So again, just to sort of highlight that transfer of those residues into foodstuffs is particularly important. So where are we now? In 2022-21, we look back at the way the environmental profession is developing in China, and this is a survey of those working in remediation industries, and essentially just picking through some of these points here, that the contaminated land sector is a growing environmental profession with a number of individuals with PhD and master's qualifications being very significant in that sector. The sector is controlled, and this is just a sort of a frequency plot of the environmental regulations and the relative use within a particular development project. So most development projects have quite extensive regulatory controls, which go from everything from standards for the soil treatment as well as the competencies of the individuals working in the sector. So a very strongly regulated business area, but again, the business is operating as pseudo-independent organizations. But associated with that, the sort of extent of which to which the treatment of materials that have been identified during contaminated site investigations and development has taken place. We're talking in terms of here, the sort of blue, the estimates of the amount of hazardous material generated and that treated is still quite a distance apart. So we're dealing with only about 40% of the contaminated waste material that's been identified as being treated to a suitable standard. And COVID hit here, so some of the data that we were able to get is we were looking for is missing still. So young professionals working for a relatively short period of time, so a relatively inexperienced sector, but working relatively rapidly to try to deal with some of these particular issues. The technologies that are commonly applied, just summarized here, show quite an extensive range of different techniques, the sort of emerging biological treatment, phytoremediation, but also the yellow is the bar for often used, and solidification, stabilization, and to an extent landfill, as well as more aggressive treatment technologies are still being used. And again, that reflects partly the regulatory conditions that are imposed. There have been some extremely nasty examples of situations where landfills and local communities have come into contact under the wrong conditions. Again, driven by perhaps less constrained development activities. I'm just trying to be polite, that's why I'm pausing. But despite the regulatory control, there are still examples of classic environmental contamination problems that still exist. So the sector is growing. It occasionally has good teachers associated with it. There's one of Suzanne in action in 2018, 17, okay, that long ago already. It's something that we see as a very important area for development, and those masters and PhD students certainly working with a focus on treatment techniques and applications to contaminated site remediation. Things are changing. The graph on the top left is the sort of government statistics for generation of standard waste, municipal waste in China over time, and the red line represents the amount that's been treated formally and recorded as being treated. So from a municipal perspective, that is a very rapid catch up, if you like, in terms of environmental compliance. And the question is, from a more societal perspective, another thing we're looking at is how that can be sustained within the community into the future, and looking at sort of wider attitudes. The leadership is encouraging the community to work more strongly in this area, and certainly in my perspective over the time visiting, there are signs of quite extensive formalization of that waste process, which up until only a few decades ago was really rather poor, to an extent that we are seeing fly tipping as well as an activity which you only associate with lazy societies, or societies where there are big restrictions on waste management activities. So I guess just to finish off, the key messages that we have a whole range of research objectives within the program, particularly to deal with identifying and treating environmental degradation. The awareness and the involvement of the young professionals in that sector is incredibly important, and certainly partnership exchange. Again, apologies, Susanna, I've managed to dig out quite a few of our visit together in Hunan is again very important in terms of trying to share experiences in terms of curriculum development to facilitate that professional sector development process. There are opportunities for waste reuse and recycling, the sort of life cycle and closed loop type of approach, and looking at wastes that may have properties that can help on an extensive, over an extensive region for treatment. So things like waste clay minerals in terms of locking up elements within the soil, preventing them moving into the food chain. And finally, my take-home message was a message I received at a meal I had more recently, and it's a sign, isn't it? This week I'm due to hear about one grant application, which is the biggest one of our industrial exchange process that we've submitted so far. So if I squeal at the wrong moment for the wrong time, it's not because Boris Johnson is back as Prime Minister, it's because we've won the grant. So again, thank you very much for your attention, and it was a very quick whistle-stop tour around some very, very important challenges that we have as society to face, both within China and around the world, because these reflect other regions as well. And I thought it was appropriate perhaps for a network to sort of show a little bit about the development of that relationship, rather than lots of data on treatment ability and bioaccumulation at this stage, but that's there in the background as well. And yeah, thanks for your attention. And we're standing on the steps of one of the oldest universities, or the oldest university in the world. Well, that university claims it's the oldest university, Yelu Academy in Changsha. Thank you.
Very much, Andrew. I don't know if we have any questions from the back. Don't hesitate now. Otherwise, we can say we've been very thorough clear. So I guess.
Or not. Well, yeah, if there aren't any, I'm happy. I'm here all week, so please have a conversation, and yeah.
Perhaps one I'm Franca Tomasi from Bari. I would like to know, what about rare earth elements present in the soils? You talked about heavy metal and other pollutants.
I haven't worked on those, unfortunately. So yes. That's.
I think it's always the same problem, because also in Europe we do not have any significant data. Yeah. The presence here in the past. I think this is the problem. Yeah,
I did try and look. There's a list, not a lot, but I couldn't do a proper review for today. But the big challenge I also had when I started this program is that mining is a state secret.
Okay.
So as a young, not young, okay, as a senile academic, and certainly news of bad things affecting regions is also not very widely broadcast, and there's certain sort of contradiction in that some locations are termed informally cancer villages because of a strong association with mining and poor health. So that disruption would be there. Shown thallium, shown manganese, antimony, as well as a common element mined in the region. So their extensive contamination would be associated with all the other deposits, but rare earths probably is even harder to work on now. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was very interested in watching the geographic area that you had focused in your study, because it was an area new to me. Although I had had some previous experiences in reading papers about rare earth mining areas, especially the north, especially with Westnasite as a source of rare earths. Then, in the list of elements that you provided us, I failed to see any rare earth.
Yeah.
Is this a logical frame that your focus on that southeastern area of China had little, if anything, to do with mining, rare earth mining areas? Please correct me, because I may have overlooked something.
Yeah, no, you're right. As I said before, we've not worked on rare earth elements, but we've worked in this region, and that is the published database for exploited or records of exploitation from the region on Mindat. Okay, the work that my group in Hunan University of Science and Technology has been very much associated with large deposits of manganese mining, copper, and some of the traditional ores, and the associated environmental impact from those mines. So I apologize, there's nothing on rare earths, but the principles are extremely similar. We have populations that are intensively exposed to the residues from mining, and that can be quite severe in many regions, but there is an evolving professional group of the young remediation industry in China is trying to catch up, but the objectives are really high in terms of likelihood to achieve. But thanks for the question. There was one at the back. Yeah.
My question is also linked to the previous two questions. I want to ask, like, in your experience, do you see the potential application of, for example, the example of manganese load, the contaminant transport model that you mentioned? Do you see the potential of applying the same or similar kind of models for the transport of elements from the manganese?
Yeah, I just picked those papers out from the team. I was involved remotely with the work, not in the lab. But yeah, so I think what they're trying to do is deal with quite extensive areas in terms of contamination. So conventional mining activity that I've been we have in Scotland some nice old residues, but they are over many meters in terms of scale of deposit on the surface. But we're dealing here with watersheds affected by that. So I would love to write the grant proposal to apply that to rare earth deposits.
Okay, thank you very much for the nice presentation. Just one question with regulatory action, which is implemented 2021 onward, is like carrying out the construction of zero waste cities. So I want to know what is the principle to make it really practical, the city like with zero waste.
Yeah, that is to look at efficient collection and treatment systems that a decade before might not be considered at all. Landfilling, as we've had over the past in other regions, has been the traditional waste management focus. So here, looking at construction, demolition, and expansion of the cities being used as a tool to ensure that treatment is carried out. So I think that's the overarching principle. I've not built a zero waste city myself, but I've seen them being built very, very rapidly. And I think you can see, particularly Changsha is one of the more rapidly developing regions in China. And there are videos, I think, on YouTube where you can see skyscrapers appearing in seconds, well, literally weeks. So the construction process is very rapid in that respect. And as it takes place, there are historical issues around previous developments being carried out poorly on contaminated sites. So schools being built on toxic waste dumps that are now being sort of remediated. But there have been sort of examples of poor practice. So now the ambition is for that cycle to be planned in a way that it deals with the waste that's being generated, also in terms of runoff from urban environments. Sponge cities are another concept that are designed to deal with very heavy rainfall in tropical regions, which causes a lot of problems in central and southern China.
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay.
I think Suzanne, you had maybe a question.
Yeah, I think that was mainly covered already. Yeah, thanks.
You can ask me at any time.
You will be right.
Thanks.
Yes, I asked Andrew to give this presentation also because we thought it might be useful to bridge really from his vast experience on metals in China to heading into rare earth elements. And perhaps one last question. Do you think also under the current trend in policies, it would be possible at all to come up with a proposal of cooperation on rare earth elements in China? I used to ask Daniel, but he was also always very sort of hesitant.
2 years ago, I would have said yes. Pre-COVID. Not just because of COVID, but that time, the country is developing very rapidly and changing very rapidly. I won't give a personal comment any further than that, but if you give me beer at a later date, I will give more comments, or if this comes to pass. So it's a fortune cookie for everybody. Yeah. Okay.